and welcome, Ramirez here. Welcome to my studio. This is the first instalment of the Ramirez gear review, so this is number 1. Each month I'm going to be reviewing a new acquisition or a new piece of gear that comes into the studio. Trust me, there's a lot of them. And this month in particular, for this review, we're going to be looking at the new acquisition, which is the DSI Prophet 8. So, first impressions of the synth. Let's take a look. It's actually a lot smaller than I anticipated it to be. If you compare it to, say, for instance, the Juno there, the Juno has got the same keyboard size, 5 octaves, but yeah, it's got the extra bit on the end. Depth-wise, it's not quite as deep as the Juno. Probably more comparable to like the size of the Nord lead, so actually quite compact, which is really nice. You can also see that it's very nobular. There's plenty of fiddling possibilities there, and keyboard itself, nice feeling keyboard. Actually looks quite beautiful. I think it's a nice addition to the studio. Let's talk a little bit about the synth. Firstly, it's made by Dave Smith Instruments, DSI. Now, Dave Smith, for anybody who knows, was the original founder of Sequential Circuits back in the 70s and 80s. He was responsible for one of the most famous polyphonic keyboards. In fact, I think it was actually the first polyphonic synthesizer, and that was the Sequential Circuits Prophet 5. From there they spawned the things like the Sequential Circuits Prophet 1, CSI drum track, CSI multi-track, etc, etc. So they had quite a run during the 70s and 80s of synthesizers, very good heritage. Now, of recent years, Dave Smith has obviously gone off on his own, and he's now started his own company, and this is basically a remake of the Prophet 5 with an extra, well, quite a lot of extra bells and whistles. Essentially the same sort of architecture in terms of it's a 2-voice digitally controlled oscillator synth digitally controlled oscillator per voice. It's an 8-voice synth. It's stackable and splittable, so you can stack 2 voices on top of each other, or you can stack 2 voices at either side of each other. Output wise, it's got 2 outputs for main outputs, but you can also send the other voice through another set of outputs, which is quite versatile. It uses the very famous Curtis analog filters, which either work operating 2 or 4 pole. Now, the Curtis filters were used on the original Prophet 5, so anybody familiar with that synth will instantly recognise the filter sound on there. But on top of all that, it's got extra features, which is a 3rd envelope, for instance, all sorts of modulation capabilities. You can modulate anything with anything. It's got a 16x4 gate step sequencer, which is actually MIDI clockable, so you can do all sorts of things. The step sequencer can be routed to the filter cutoff, for instance, or the notes, or the LFO, whatever. So it's very, very, very versatile. So yeah, and I think sound-wise, it actually sounds to me more like the Oberheims. Oberheims were very famous in the 80s as well. You know, Prince used to use them a lot. Everybody used to use the Oberheims, big fat American analog synthesizer. This sounds like one of those, basically. Now, this thing here isn't new. This was acquired from a friend of mine. It originally belonged to Mickey Slim. Mickey Slim then gave it to Funkagenda. Funkagenda has now passed it on to me. So I'm going to find out, potentially, why it is that it's had 2 owners and I'm the 3rd owner. Is it any good, or is it no good at all? This is what we're going to look into. So, using the synth, let's get into it a little bit. I've not had it that long, I've not played with it that much, but let's have a go, right? So, firstly, the filter. Let's have a look at that. Here's an interesting sound. So, frequency, obviously. Now, one of the things that Funkagenda told me about was that these pots, these are what you call endless rotary controllers. And this is the original revision of the synth, which had the endless ones. Now what they've done is actually made the new version, which has got the encoder ones, a bit like the Virus here, where they stop and start kind of thing, rather than the endless encoders. And I think the reason is because on using the encoder, some of them actually break, like the frequency one isn't working particularly well. Yeah, as I try and move it down, the parameter goes up. So there's obviously issues with these pots. That's number 1. But anyway, you can actually move the parameters around with the parameter 1 and parameter 2 button there. So even though this button is no longer working, I can still move the parameter, change the parameter with that button there. So I've been assured it's not a problem. Okay, so let's start with the filter. So it's in 4-pole mode. This is an interesting sound, one of the first sounds I just pulled up from the synthesizer. So it's in 4-pole mode. Quite a resonant sound you can hear, and as I open the filter there's a really nice... That's a nice filter, isn't it? So you've got, on the filter you've got obviously the frequency, the resonance, the envelope amount, which we'll put some envelope amount on and we'll turn the frequency down. You can hear that. And obviously here's the filter envelope control. You can also hear on this sound as well that there's a really nice like aftertouch kind of effect built in. That's obviously routed to the aftertouch is routed to the filter cutoff, so you're getting a nice high pass type thing. There we go. So the filter. So there's the envelope is for the filter there. Then we move on to the amp. So there's an amp, general amp for the envelope control for the amp there for the volume. So let's have a mess with that. Okay, so then also you've got over here, we've got modulators. Now, I presume, you look at the modulators, you've got a modulation source, which would be, you can pick, you've got a modulation source, you've got a modulation destination, and you've got a modulation amount, and it looks like you've got four types of modulators there. So let's have a look at this one. Mod source, we can say, for instance, we're going to use the modulation wheel. Let's have a look, we'll go to number 2. Yeah, mod wheel, so that's the modulation wheel. Modulation destination, so we'll have that as filter cutoff, if we can find that. If I can find it somewhere, it's in there somewhere. No, I've gone past it. Where are you, cutoff? Off. Let's have a look. Oscillator to frequency. Okay, so, and then we'll have the modulation amount. What we're going to do here. So what we've done is routed the modulation wheel to the pitch of the second oscillator. So what we've got, oscillator 1 is actually staying at the same pitch, oscillator 2 is actually rising in pitch with the modulation wheel. It's quite nice. And you've got 4 of these modulators here. Also, we'll move over to the LFO. We've got these 4 LFOs here. And again, you've got 4 LFOs, you've got an LFO destination, you've got the frequency, which is the speed, you've got the shape of the LFO, and you've got the amount of the LFO. So for instance, let's have a look. LFO 1, we'll route that to oscillator 2 or oscillator 1 frequency. We'll do the amount a little bit there. We'll have it on key sync, we'll set frequency quite fast. We'll just turn the amount. That actually seems like it's going to... Doesn't seem like it's doing anything. Right, okay. So we'll do the destination to somewhere else. Destination, we'll do it to all frequencies. There we go. So there's your classic wobble. Turn off that envelope amount there. So again, there's 4 LFOs that can be routed to anywhere, etc. The LFOs can actually be modulated from the mod source as well, so you can actually modulate, say for instance, the speed of the LFO from the mod wheel, which is quite interesting. So lots of modulation sources, that's really nice. We've also got the gated sequencer, which I need to find a preset which actually shows you that. So we'll go to program, let's have a look, we'll go to something that's got a gated. One sec, we'll keep going. Keep going, I'll find there's some really nice presets in here which utilise this. And if you look here closely where the flashing lights are, you can see that there's a 16 steps, and you can hear it's obviously the filter cutoff has been routed to the step sequencer, and if you can turn up the BPM speed there. And from what I believe, you can route any parameter to the step sequencer, which including notes, so you can make little sequences if you like. Let me see if I can find another one. I'll go back, see. Now it's a pretty complex program, that one, because you can see you've got the stack A and B actually lit here, and that means that there's two sounds on top of each other, both with their own step sequencers running together, so it's creating this pattern that almost sounds like a full production. So if you take off the stack of A and B, that's one's doing that and the other one is doing the bass line underneath. It's quite nice. That looks quite complicated to program, to be fair. Okay, so I'll show you some other things. Again, utilising the gated step sequencer there, along with aftertouch, which is the harder I press the key, I'm getting this. And that takes off there. So there we go, that's really quite interesting. The modulation capabilities are amazing. So although it's only, the filter is only a low pass filter, you can actually get some quite interesting effects with the filter by the modulation routings, etc. Now, amazing sounding synthesizer. There's some beautiful sounding. It's actually very warm, very analog. It's got a fully analog signal path. Whoops. It's got a fully analog signal path, which means it's very warm, very fat, and it shouldn't be digital sounding in any respect at all. So, you know, it should be good for pads, synths, you know, general sort of 80s polyphonic synth sounds, etc. So let's see. Excuse my keyboard playing skills, they're much to be desired. Typically 80s big, fat and analog. A lot of the sounds are actually stacked to make them sound fatter, etc. So they're obviously quite a versatile synthesizer that sounds quite beautiful, to be fair. Yeah. So we've been looking briefly at the DSI Prophet 8. We've gone into a little bit of detail about it, looked at some of the sounds, etc. Now personally, I really love it. This is why it's sat here in my studio, of course. But it is quite a niche thing. It doesn't do everything. Plugins these days, you can get plugins that are all bells and all whistles that will do everything, take care. But for that fat, analog, warmth, I don't think you can beat it. It's absolutely stunning. It just sounds beautiful. If you've got the cash to spare and you're in the market for something analog, big, fat and warm, this is the beast for you. So this has been D. Ramirez. Look out for the next episode, episode number 2 of the D. Ramirez Gear Review. Thanks.